I didn't know where else to go. What happened to you? Please let me in. Come inside, now.
We shared the same face, same eyes, same mouth, same hands that learned to fold laundry the same way, holding the corners tight before bringing them together. But when my sister appeared at my door that Tuesday evening, her side of our face was a map of purple and yellow, a painting made by a man who had mistaken her gentleness for a permanent condition. She didn't say my name. She just looked at me the way a drowning person looks at the last solid thing within reach. Not with hope exactly, with something smaller than hope, something that had forgotten what hope felt like but still remembered the direction it used to live in. Everyone always said I was the broken one, the dangerous twin, the one you lower your voice about at family dinners, the one our mother worried about in that low, persistent way, like a frequency you stop noticing until the room finally goes silent. But standing in that doorway, staring at what lived beneath my sister's concealer, I felt something shift in my chest with the quiet finality of a lock clicking open. They had been watching the wrong sister unravel this whole time. I am not the sister who cries. I am not the sister who endures. I am not the sister who files a report and prays something comes of it. I am the sister they warned everyone about. And for the first time in my life, standing at that door, looking at Ava's face, that was not a flaw. It was the only qualification that mattered. They called me dangerous. They called me reckless. They called me too much, too loud, too volatile, too willing to reduce something to rubble when the measured thing would have been to step back. I never stepped back. That was always my problem. I came into the world first, 11 minutes before Ava, and I think the universe front-loaded everything fierce it had in those 11 minutes and left her with whatever was quieter, softer, easier to love in a room full of people. Our mother loved us both absolutely, but she worried about me in a specific way she never worried about Ava. A low, persistent worry, like a pilot light she could never fully extinguish. I noticed. I always noticed. By 19, I had burned through 2 jobs, 1 apartment, and the only relationship I ever truly cared about. All casualties of the same force living behind my sternum. Not anger exactly, something older than anger, something that didn't build gradually the way people describe their temper building. It simply arrived, fully formed, like weather that skips the clouds and goes straight to lightning. A therapist once told me I had no internal buffer between stillness and explosion, that most people move through levels, irritation, and then frustration, and then controlled anger, and then rage, pausing at each floor to make a decision before descending. She wasn't wrong. What she never understood was that the ground I hit was always the same ground, the place where someone was using their power against someone who had none. That was when the thing in my chest woke up, the compass, the protector, the fire that had no name but always knew exactly where to point. The world called it a disorder. I called it a misaligned weapon. The problem was not the fury. The fury was precise, consistent, morally coherent. The problem was I had no architecture to match it. All heat, no blueprint, burning structures down without a design for what came after. And while I was busy surviving my own wreckage, city to city, consequence to consequence, my sister Ava was doing what Ava had always done. She was trusting someone. She met Mark at 24. I was deep in my own chaos and I missed the signs. I missed the way he cataloged her. Not the way a man looks at someone he loves, but the way someone looks at something they are deciding whether to keep. I missed the architecture of it entirely. She paid for my absence with 7 years of her life. There is no word large enough to hold that guilt. I have stopped looking for one. But guilt, I have learned, has only one honest use: action. I made her sit down before I made her talk. She needed tea and 20 minutes and the particular silence of a room where no one was going to hurt her before her body would stop bracing for the next impact. I watched it happen in degrees. The shoulders descending, the breath losing its shallow, rationed quality, the hands finally unclenching in her lap. Then I asked her to show me. She hesitated, the way people hesitate when they've been told too many times that what happened to them was either their fault or not that serious. Then slowly she rolled up her sleeve. I had prepared myself to be angry. I had not prepared myself for the map. Both arms. Old bruises gone yellow at the edges, newer ones still deep purple underneath. Finger-shaped marks on her inner arms where someone had grabbed and held while she struggled. A burn mark near her left wrist she explained away so quickly I knew the explanation had been rehearsed for someone else. Someone she had hoped would ask and simultaneously prayed would not. That was just the surface. The deeper inventory arrived in pieces, the way trauma delivers itself, not in a clean confession, in fragments, each one worse than the last. What Mark had done was not simply violence, it was a system, every part designed to keep her exactly where she was. Mark controlled every dollar, not managed, controlled. Ava received an allowance, a word that belongs to children, dispensed weekly at his discretion, subject to reduction if he decided she had been wasteful. 7 years of her labor maintaining his home, raising his child, performing the life he presented publicly, and she had no financial footprint, no account in her name. What she did have, without her knowledge, without her signature, only her stolen identity, or 3 credit cards opened in her name, what forensic specialists call coerced debt, a liberty crime, chains you don't see until you try to leave and discover they've been building for years. The combined balance had already consumed 4 years of any financial future she might have imagined. He didn't just trap her in a house. He trapped her in a number. The isolation had been just as methodical. Friends who stopped calling after he answered her phone one too many times and made the conversation uncomfortable enough that calling back felt like too much effort. Family who lived far enough away to be managed with careful, cheerful voice messages he sometimes stood beside her to monitor. She hadn't noticed the circle closing until it was already closed. And then Ava said something that stopped me completely. She said their daughter, 4 years old, had developed a stutter in the last 6 months. The pediatrician had recommended a specialist. Mark had decided it was unnecessary, an overreaction, Ava being, as usual, dramatic. The appointment was never made. The little girl was 4 years old. She had learned to be afraid of her own voice in her own home, and the one person positioned to help her had looked at his daughter's fear and seen an inconvenience. I set down my cup very carefully. I did not announce a decision. I did not make a speech. Something simply closed inside me with the soft, permanent sound of a bolt sliding home, a door that would not be reopened. Ava was still talking, still using the careful language of someone who has spent years making their pain sound reasonable enough not to be dismissed, and I was already somewhere else entirely. I was already thinking about what I was going to need to take with me. What I had not yet accounted for, what Ava told me next, her voice dropping to something barely above breath, was what Mark had said would happen if she ever left. The way she said it made my blood go cold. He had been specific, detailed. He had described the sequence of events with the patience of a man who had thought it through carefully and wanted her to understand that he had thought it through carefully. She wasn't just trapped by bruises or debt or isolation. She was trapped by the certainty that leaving would cost her more than staying. This was the final wall, and it was the one he was most confident in. He had built it to last. He had not built it to survive me. I told her what I was going to do, and she looked at me like I had just suggested we both step off a ledge. Mia, her voice was barely a sound. You don't know what he's capable of. No, I said, but he doesn't know what I'm capable of either, and right now that's the only advantage we have. The tears came fast, not for herself, I realized. She had been living inside her worst fear for 7 years. She was terrified for me. Even now, even emptied out by everything he had taken, Ava's first instinct was to protect someone else. He had taken almost everything from her. He had not managed to take that. I brought her to the bathroom mirror, the only one long enough to show us both at once. We stood side by side and looked. Same face, same eyes, tracking the same reflection. The only visible difference between us was what another person had decided to do with his hands. I watched her look at our reflection, and I watched the exact moment she understood what I was proposing, not as an idea, but as a reality. The persona and the shadow, finally standing in the same body of light. The gentle one and the fierce one. The woman who had survived by yielding, and the woman who had survived by refusing to. Two halves of the same coin, finally facing the same direction. You tried surviving him with kindness, I said quietly. 7 years of kindness. I'm gonna try something else. He will know, she said. The moment he looks at you, he will know. Then I'll make sure he doubts himself before he trusts that instinct. We stood there a moment longer, two women dividing the world between us in silence. She took my keys, my address, the name of my neighbor who would ask no questions. I took her wedding ring, still warm from her hand, her phone, and the envelope of medical records she had kept hidden in a box under the bathroom sink for 3 years. 7 years of documented injuries, collected the way people collect evidence when they are preparing for a war they are not sure they will survive. Fear leads to silence. Silence leads to endurance. Endurance leads to the moment you finally decide you have endured enough. That moment was now. I took her name. At the door, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, the grip of someone who has spent years holding on to things that kept being taken. "He keeps a spare phone," she whispered, "hidden in the left panel of his car. I don't know who he calls on it. I've never been able to find out." She released me. The door closed and the night air hit my face. Cold, immediate, carrying the smell of something that had already begun whether I was ready or not. A hidden phone, a second life running parallel to the one my sister had been trapped inside. I had walked in thinking I understood the battlefield. I was already wrong. The house was nicer than I expected, not with admiration, with the cold, measuring eye of someone counting discrepancies. A neighborhood that required a salary Mark's paperwork did not reflect. A car in the driveway that belonged in a different tax bracket. Furniture chosen to impress people who visited rather than comfort the people who lived there. I stood in the entryway and ran the lifestyle gap calculation in my head. What his reported income could support against what I was currently standing inside. The numbers did not balance. They were never meant to. This was the first thread, and threads, if you find the right one and pull with the right pressure, unravel everything. I found the financial evidence within an hour. A statement partially hidden beneath unopened mail. A transfer to an account under a name I didn't recognize. A name belonging, I would confirm later, to Mark's brother. The notes said loan, but the pattern said something different. Regular, consistent, round numbers at the end of every month moved through his brother the way money is moved when its owner needs distance from it. Not a loan, a money mule arrangement. His brother was holding laundered marital assets, funds cycled through their joint account through a third party to create a paper distance that would survive a casual audit but not a forensic one. I photographed everything, slow, methodical. The credit accounts in Ava's name, 4, not 3, confirmed what I already suspected. This was not a marriage that had gone wrong. This was a system that had been built deliberately to leave one person with nothing if she ever tried to walk away. Then I heard a small sound from the hallway. She was 4 years old and she had learned to enter a room like an apology. Soft feet, rounded shoulders, eyes that checked the emotional temperature of the space before the rest of her committed to entering it. She saw my face, her mother's face, and something in her expression did not relax the way a child's expression should relax when they see their parent. She watched me carefully, waiting. A 4-year-old should not know how to wait like that. That kind of waiting is learned through repetition, through enough moments of unpredictability that the nervous system stops trusting the calm and starts treating it as the pause before something worse. She whispered, very quietly, as though volume itself had become something dangerous in this house. "Is Daddy angry today?" I kept my face still through an act of will I cannot fully explain. I crouched to her level, kept my voice soft, let her decide when to come closer. She studied me for a long moment with eyes far older than her face, and then she took one careful step forward, the way you test ice before you trust it. Not yet, I thought, but he's about to have a very good reason to be. I tucked her in an hour later and sat on the edge of her small bed until her breathing steadied and deepened and the room filled with the particular quiet of a child who finally felt safe enough to let go. Then I went back to the table, laid out everything I had found, and began to build. I was still working at midnight when I heard the key in the front door, and behind it, a voice on a phone call, low, careful, intimate. The spare phone, the hidden one, the specific register of a man speaking to someone he is protecting from discovery. Mark was not alone in the way my sister had believed he was alone, and whoever was on that phone already knew her name. He ended the call before he came through the door. I heard the shift, the particular silence of a man reassembling his public face before entering a space he considered his. I was at the kitchen counter when he walked in, back partially turned, giving him the gift of a moment to look at me before I looked at him. I needed to see what he did when he believed he wasn't being observed. What he did was nothing remarkable. He set down his keys with the casual authority of someone who has never once questioned their right to take up space. He scanned the room, the swift, proprietary glance of a man conducting a silent inventory, everything in its place, everyone in their place. Then his eyes settled on me.
"You didn't call back," he said. "No greeting, an opening move dressed as a statement." "I was busy," I said, and turned around. Something crossed his face so quickly I would have missed it without watching for exactly that. A flicker of recalibration, there and gone in under a second. He recovered smoothly. Men like Mark always recover smoothly. It is the primary skill the life they've built requires. He reached for the financial tool next, the one that had always worked fastest. "I checked the account," he said, moving to the refrigerator, not looking at me. "You overspent again. We talked about this." "Did we?" I said. Not a question. He turned then, really looked. The response he expected, the small contraction, the apologetic repositioning, the eyes that drop first, did not come. I held his gaze with the particular quality of stillness that is not passivity, but its precise opposite. The stillness of something that has decided. Gray rock, flat water, nothing for him to grip. He searched my face for the woman he knew, for the woman 7 years of systematic pressure had built. She wasn't there. "What's wrong with you?" The charm was gone, replaced by something flatter and considerably more honest. "Nothing," I said. "Why?" He stared at me the way a person stares when the ground has shifted and they cannot identify the source. Then he smiled, the smile that didn't reach anything behind his eyes. "You seem different," he said carefully. "Do I?" I said. He walked past me toward the hallway, but he glanced back once, the quick reflexive glance of a predator that had detected something in its environment it cannot yet name but has already begun, in some deep basement level of instinct, to fear. This was his first narcissistic injury, the first crack in the architecture of his dominance. A man like Mark requires a fear response the way an engine requires fuel. Without it, the whole mechanism begins to stall. I had given him nothing, and nothing, I was learning, was the most powerful thing I had ever withheld. The social test. 3 days in, his colleague appeared at the house unannounced. They spoke in the driveway for 11 minutes. I watched from the upstairs window, and I watched the colleague glance toward the house twice, not the casual glance of conversation, but the directed, purposeful glance of someone who had been given a specific instruction. Look at her. Tell me if something seems different. I went downstairs and opened the front door before they finished. You must be Ryan, I said with a smile calibrated exactly to Ava's warmth. Come in, I just made coffee. Ryan looked at me, really looked, and I held the warmth and steadiness and the absolute blankness of a woman with nothing to hide, and I watched him find nothing, because there was nothing available to be found. He stayed for 20 minutes, left without the confirmation he had come for. Mark watched him go from the hallway. I went back to the kitchen and poured the coffee out. The domestic test. The child almost saw through me on day 5. We were reading together on the couch, a picture book she had chosen herself, brought from her room with both hands and a seriousness that broke something in my chest. She climbed into my lap, read 2 pages, then looked up at me with those watchful, ancient for 4 eyes and said, "Mommy smells different." The room went very still inside me, even as my face stayed completely soft. "Mommy tried a new soap," I said. "Do you like it?" She considered this with the gravity of a scientist weighing evidence. Then she rested her head against my chest. "It's okay," she said. "You're still warm." I held her and kept my breathing even and did not let myself feel anything until she was asleep. The ego test. He tried to break me on day 6. He waited until we were alone, until the child was in bed and the house had settled, and then he came into the kitchen with the particular energy of a man who has decided that warmth has failed and it is time to remind someone of their position. He stood very close. Too close, the deliberate invasion of space that is not quite physical threat, but is designed to feel like one. "You've been strange this week," he said. "I don't know what you think is happening, but let me be clear about something." He let the silence work for him. The pause that was meant to feel like gravity, as if his words had a weight her body should already be responding to. "Nothing has changed," he said. "Do you understand me? Nothing." I looked at him. I gave him nothing. Not defiance, not fear, not the flicker of the eyes that would tell him his words had landed. I was still water, flat stone, gray rock that reflects back only emptiness. The silence stretched. And then, for the first time, it was him who looked away. I waited until the house was fully asleep. Not just quiet, asleep. There is a difference, and in a house like this, you learn it quickly. Quiet is the absence of noise. Asleep is when the tension that a controlling person generates simply by being conscious finally releases its grip on every room. I gave it an hour past the last sound. Then I moved. The office first. The first drawer held exactly what it was meant to hold, the surface version of a life, orderly and unremarkable. The second held something more useful, account statements for a business name I had never heard Ava mention, registered 18 months ago, generating income that appeared nowhere in the household financial records. I documented everything. Slow, methodical, no missed pages. The money mule arrangement unraveled faster than I expected. Once I found the business account, the transfer pattern clarified itself within 20 minutes. Money moving from the marital account to the business account to his mother's personal account, rotated in a pattern timed just irregular enough to avoid automated flags. 3 years of marital assets, laundered through family, sitting in an account that would, if examined casually, look like nothing more than a helpful mother holding a loan for her son. It was not alone. It was storage, and the paperwork protecting it would not survive what I was about to do to it. I photographed every page. I recorded him twice without planning to. The first time, he came downstairs for water at 2 in the morning and made a comment about the household account that inadvertently confirmed the transfer pattern in his own words. Casual, unguarded, the way people are when they believe no one is paying the kind of attention I was paying. The second time was worse. Better for my purposes, worse for him. He took a call in the kitchen doorway. 3 minutes of conversation that connected the business account, his brother's name, and a timeline that would dismantle every version of events he had prepared for a divorce proceeding. I reached out to one person, a woman I had known years ago, now in financial forensics. I need someone to look at something that doesn't add up. Her response came in under 4 minutes. Where did you get this? Not a question, the punctuation of someone looking at something significant. Does it hold? I typed. It holds, she said. This is enough to bury him. I set the phone down and looked at what I had built across the kitchen table. It was enough. I knew it was enough. And I knew with equal certainty I could not use it yet. I needed him to move first. To act, visibly, in front of people who could not later claim they hadn't seen it. Evidence without witnesses is a story. Evidence with witnesses is a verdict. Justice needs a sword, and it needs someone watching when the sword falls. I began putting the documents back exactly as I had found them. What I did not account for, what I discovered when I picked up my phone, was a calendar notification synced from Mark's account to the household tablet, set 6 days from now, a location I didn't recognize, and in the notes field, a single name. Ava's name, her full name, the name only someone who knew about the swap would have reason to write down and schedule. Someone had put my sister in his calendar. The appointment was 6 days.
He brought me flowers on a Tuesday. No occasion, no explanation. He set them on the counter with the careful casualness of a man who had decided warmth was the next tool to try, and he watched me from the corner of his eye the way you watch something you are not sure is still contained. I thanked him, quietly, gave him nothing else. This was the love-bombing phase, the cycle every person who has lived with a controlling partner knows intimately. Coldness fails, so he reaches for warmth. Warmth fails, so he'll reach for threat. He was cycling through every tool in sequence and finding all of them blunted against a woman who could name each one as he picked it up. It failed. They all failed, and his confusion was turning into something sharper. I watched him recalibrate over the following 48 hours. The calls in rooms he thought I couldn't hear, the questions to his brother, lateral, careful questions about Ava's history, her family, her past, as if building a case or verifying a suspicion he wasn't yet willing to name aloud. His eyes tracking me across rooms with a new quality of attention, less proprietary now, more investigative. He was no longer managing me, he was studying me. And then his lawyer called. I didn't hear the conversation, but I heard the tone, clipped, defensive, the specific energy of a man being advised to begin preparing something. He was making moves, filing things preemptively, planning for a version of events in which he was the victim of an unstable wife, building the narrative before I could build mine. The window wasn't just closing, it had a countdown on it now. I called my contact that night. I need to move, I told her. How fast can you have everything formatted for a legal filing? She said, 48 hours. But Mia, once you file, it's visible. He'll know within hours. I know. And the witnesses you need? I looked across the hallway toward the room where Mark was on his phone again, voice low, door almost closed.
I have one shot at this, I said quietly. I'm going to invite every person who has ever covered for him into the same room, and I'm going to let him be exactly who he is in front of them all. Silence on her end. Then, and if he figures out who you are before then? I watched the thin line of light beneath his door. I said, he won't, but if he does, I'll already have everything I need. I set the phone down. It lit up immediately, a message from the number I had saved under no name, the number appearing 4 times in Mark's hidden phone, always late at night. 4 words, I know about Mia. I read it twice. Then I moved up the timeline by 24 hours and began making calls. Whoever knew, they were going to watch what happened next.
I sent the invitations myself, framed as a dinner, casual, the kind a wife organizes to signal a return to normalcy after a difficult few weeks. Mark's brother, Ryan, the colleague, Mark's mother, who held 3 years of laundered marital assets in an account she believed was invisible to everyone but herself. I chose each name deliberately. Every load-bearing wall in the structure he had built, every person who had looked the other way, said nothing, held money or alibis or convenient silence on his behalf. I needed them all in the same room when it came down. The documentation had been filed that morning, quietly, cleanly, through a family law attorney who had reviewed everything and used the word comprehensive in a tone that meant something considerably stronger. By the time the first guest arrived, the financial records, the recordings, the 4 coerced debt accounts, and the money mule trail connecting Mark's business account to his mother were already in the hands of people whose job was to act on them. Mark did not know this yet. He was in a good mood at dinner. Charming, expansive, the public version, performed for an audience that had only ever been shown the public version, the reasonable man, the responsible husband, the good son. I sat at the end of the table and watched him work the room. I thought about Ava sitting in my apartment right now, breathing air that didn't require his permission. I thought about a 4-year-old girl who had learned to enter a room like an apology and was tonight, for the first time, sleeping without listening for footsteps. I waited until the wine was poured and the performances were comfortable. Then I placed my phone in the center of the table and pressed play. His own voice filled the room, the 2 in the morning recording, casual, unguarded, 38 seconds connecting every thread, the account, the transfers, the brother's name, the timeline, the money moving in circles designed to look like something else. The room went very still. Mark moved first, the sharp, reflexive movement of someone reaching to stop something already in motion. "That's not," he started. "There's more," I said. I looked at his brother. His brother looked at the table. Ryan reached for his phone, already calculating the distance between loyalty and personal legal exposure, a calculation that, I had suspected, would not take him long. Mark's mother had gone the specific shade of pale that belongs to people who have just understood the difference between believing they are protected and actually being protected. I gave them 60 seconds with the silence, 60 seconds to sit inside what they had enabled and decide what it was worth now that it had arrived with consequences attached. Ryan spoke first, quietly, to no one in particular. "I didn't know about the accounts." "Ryan," Mark's voice carried a warning. "I didn't know," he said again, louder, this time looking directly at me. The brother stood up, walked to the kitchen, and made a phone call I did not try to hear. Mark's mother set down her glass with extraordinary, deliberate care and said in a voice entirely emptied of its usual authority, "Mark, what did you do?" And Mark, the man who had spent 7 years telling my sister that no one would ever believe her, that she was unstable, that her version of reality was a symptom of her own dysfunction, looked around the table at the people who had built his credibility brick by brick. And he watched every single one of them choose themselves. The scales had shifted. The sword had fallen, and justice, which does not always arrive wearing a badge or holding a gavel, but always arrives eventually, had finally opened her eyes in this room. He turned to me then, and I saw the exact moment he understood, not just that the trap had closed, but who he was looking at. "You're not her," he said, very quietly, almost to himself. "No," I said, "I'm not." The doorbell rang. I opened it. It was not the attorney's office. It was Ava, standing on the doorstep in the cold, her face carrying something I had never seen on it before. Not fear, not apology, not the careful blankness of a woman managing her own survival minute by minute. Resolve. She had decided somewhere in the quiet of my apartment over the past weeks that she was not going to let this end without being present for it. That after 7 years of being absent from her own life, she was going to be in the room when it was given back to her. "I want to be here," she said. "When it ends, I want him to see us both." I stepped aside. She walked in and stood beside me, our identical faces, our identical hands, our entirely different histories finally converging in the same doorway. Behind me, I heard Mark's chair scrape back from the table, and then from inside his brother's phone call, I heard the word that meant everything irreversible had already begun. Officers.
The papers were signed on a Thursday morning in an office that smelled of coffee and carpet cleaner and the particular neutrality of a space designed to hold the endings of things without judgment. Ava's hand did not shake. I watched for it. The old trembling, the held breath, the body bracing out of 7 years of muscle memory. It did not come. She signed her name with the clean finality of someone closing a door they have already walked away from, set the pen down, and did not look back at the papers once. The settlement was just. Every coerced debt account zeroed and reassigned to him, every money mule transfer traced, documented, and returned. 7 years of unpaid labor converted into a number that would never fully account for what it had cost her, but would account for it in the only language currently available, and so the one we used. Mark's financial architecture did not survive the forensic examination intact. It was not meant to. His mother retained her own attorney by the 2nd day, his brother by the 3rd. Ryan provided a voluntary statement within 48 hours. The architecture of enablement. Every person who had held a wall in place discovered in the same week that the structure they had been protecting had become a liability. Every load-bearing wall found somewhere else to be.
3 weeks later, Ava and I stood outside the building where she had just collected the final paperwork. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of light that shows everything clearly and forgives nothing, and somehow still manages to feel like a beginning. I looked at her face. Same face as mine. Same eyes, same mouth, same hands that learned to fold laundry the same way. But something behind her eyes had changed. The hollowness was not entirely gone. That kind of hollowness takes time, takes work, takes more than 3 weeks in a signed document. But inside it, something small and stubborn had taken hold. An ember, her own, entirely. She had not just survived, she had individuated, reclaimed the self that had been systematically erased, piece by piece, year by year, until she had almost forgotten it ever existed. It existed. It had always existed. It had been waiting. Her daughter ran out of the building and straight into Ava's legs with the full-body commitment that belongs only to 4-year-olds, and Ava caught her without looking, the automatic sureness of a mother's body, and laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, unguarded and unmanaged, the kind that had been too dangerous to let out in that house for too long. The sound of it moved through me like something being set down after a very long carry. She looked at me over her daughter's head. "What do we do now?" I thought about the years I had spent burning the wrong things, the years she had spent surviving the wrong person, the specific shape of the gap between who we had each been and who we were standing here in the cold morning light, choosing to become. Anything we want, for the first time, anything at all. Her daughter held both our hands and swung between us, laughing, wanting to go higher, the way children always want to go higher when they finally feel safe enough to leave the ground. They called me the dangerous one. They were right. They just never understood who I was dangerous for. Comment dangerous if you would have done the same. And if this story found you at the right moment, you'll know why. The next story is already on your screen.